Hunter and hunted. Detective Sarah Briggs didn't sleep that night. The lighter's photograph burned into her mind, as if the tiny flame it could spark had already set her world on fire. She sat in her small apartment with files scattered across the kitchen table. Empty coffee cups lined the counter. Each document, each phone record, each blurry surveillance still, together they whispered the same name. But saying it out loud felt like blasphemy. Commander Mark Rawls. The hero of Cleveland. The man who turned press conferences into sermons and turned terrified citizens into believers. If she was wrong, her career was over. If she was right, the city's protector was its predator. She stared at the ceiling until dawn and finally decided. She had to go underground. Her first move was secrecy. She stopped filing updates through the official channels, knowing that Rawls's reach extended everywhere. Instead, she began keeping duplicate notes in a locked drawer at her apartment, handwritten, coded. She used burner phones, cash, favors from old academy friends who owed her nothing but trust. At the precinct, she played her part. Another detective chasing Kane, another weary cop drowning in paperwork. But when Rawls walked into a room, her every nerve screamed, "Watch him." Rawls, meanwhile, felt the change. He couldn't prove it, but he knew. Briggs was no longer just ambitious, she was dangerous. He studied her the way he used to study criminals. Posture, tone, the way her eyes flicked too quickly when she thought she was being discreet. She had the scent of someone who knew too much. But killing her outright would be a mistake. Too obvious. Too reckless. If she disappeared, questions would rain down. He needed something cleaner. So he watched. And he waited. The streets of Cleveland gave him cover. Ghosts' war with Kane escalated into open slaughter. Drive-by shootings turned into block sieges. One night, a nightclub on the east side erupted in gunfire, 20 dead, 30 wounded. Rawls stood before the cameras again, speaking of justice and order, while his other half, the Ghost, sent flowers to a widow he himself had created. But behind the show, Ghost felt pressure. Kane was relentless. His soldiers hit hard and then vanished, always knowing where to strike. Ghost's own lieutenants muttered about betrayal. One of them, an old-timer named Rico, confronted him in the safe house. "Boss," Rico said carefully, "somebody's feeding Kane from the inside. Maybe one of ours." Ghost's cigarette glowed red in the dark. "You think I don't know that?" Rico shifted nervously. "Then what are we waiting for?" Ghost blew smoke in his face. "We wait until the rat shows its teeth. Then we cut the head off." Rico swallowed hard and said no more. But Ghost wasn't just waiting. He was digging. And what he uncovered shook even him. One of Kane's men, caught in a botched raid, spat out something under interrogation before dying. The cop feeds him. The big cop. Ghost leaned in close, fists bloody. "What cop?" The man coughed, blood spilling. "The one they all trust." Then he was gone. For the first time in years, Ghost felt a flicker of fear. Could Kane know? Could Kane suspect who Ghost really was? Back in her apartment, Briggs pieced together her own trail. She traced financial anomalies, small, almost invisible cash movements that lined up with Ghost's operations. She found surveillance gaps in precinct scheduling that always seemed to benefit Ghost's heists. And she found one chilling link: the phone records of a late-night call traced near Rawls's house, hours before Ghost's men moved on a warehouse. The lines were converging. But she needed proof, something undeniable, something that would burn through Rawls's armor of respectability. So she made her choice. She would shadow him herself. The first night she followed at a distance. Rawls left the precinct late, his car gliding smoothly through downtown before turning onto the highway. Briggs kept 2 cars behind, lights off, heart hammering. He drove to the industrial district. Empty warehouses, broken glass, the smell of oil and rust. She parked and watched as Rawls stepped out of his car, adjusting his coat. Another vehicle slid from the shadows, blacked out windows. A door opened. A figure stepped out. Ghost. Briggs's breath caught. Her eyes strained through the binoculars, the streetlight spilling just enough glow. The 2 men faced each other, spoke in low voices. And then Ghost laughed. Rawls smirked. They clasped hands like old friends. Her stomach turned cold. It wasn't suspicion anymore. It was truth. She stayed hidden until they parted ways, but adrenaline made her reckless. On the drive back, she kept replaying the handshake in her mind. She had him. She had him. But Rawls noticed the tail. Not that night, not clearly, but he felt the prickling in his spine, the instinct that had kept him alive for years. Someone was behind him. Someone who couldn't be allowed to live. The next morning he called Sanchez into his office. "Briggs," he said casually, pouring coffee. "She's ambitious, right? Maybe a little too ambitious. Sanchez shrugged. She's sharp, I'll give her that. But she's green. Thinks she's the only one who can see the big picture. Rawls nodded slowly. Keep an eye on her. People like that, they burn out fast. But in his mind, the decision was already made. Sarah Briggs had just signed her death warrant. Closing the trap. Rawls always believed the cleanest murders were the ones no one recognized as murders at all. Accidents. Random violence. Suicides. Things that happened every day in a city like Cleveland. And Sarah Briggs? She deserved nothing less than a flawless disappearance. The plan began with misdirection. Rawls leaked a fake lead to her desk, a tip about a possible Kane safe house in the Old Steel District. The kind of tip an eager detective couldn't resist. He watched her reaction from across the bullpen. Briggs skimmed the note, narrowed her eyes, then quietly slipped it into her folder. She didn't tell Sanchez. She didn't tell anyone. Perfect. That night, Rawls suited up as Ghost. His men were already waiting at the abandoned warehouse. The orders were simple: make it look like Kane's doing. A stray bullet, a bloody alley, a detective killed in action. Nobody would question it. The department would mourn, Rawls would lead the funeral, and his secret would remain intact. But fate has a way of laughing at perfect plans. Briggs arrived later than expected. Rawls had pictured her stepping into the trap alone, but she wasn't alone. A young uniform named Derek Hayes rode with her, a rookie she sometimes mentored. Rawls cursed under his breath when he saw the second car roll up. The ambush began anyway. Shots cracked through the night, muzzle flashes lighting up the gutted warehouse. Hayes panicked, firing blindly. Briggs dragged him behind cover, her eyes sweeping the shadows. Ghost stepped forward, mask glinting. He raised his gun, aimed straight for Briggs's head. And then Hayes did something Rawls hadn't predicted. He charged. Screaming, firing, desperate to protect the detective who'd taken him under her wing. A bullet tore through Hayes's chest. He collapsed at Briggs's feet. Her scream cut through the chaos. Rawls froze for just a second. The kid's sacrifice hadn't been part of the design. Briggs crawled to Hayes, pressing her hands against the wound, sobbing. By the time Ghost pulled the trigger again, she had already rolled behind cover, dragging the dying rookie with her. Police sirens howled in the distance, drawn by the noise. Rawls's men scattered like rats. The trap had failed. Later that night, Briggs sat in the hospital corridor, Hayes's blood still staining her clothes. He hadn't made it. Her grief hardened into fury. Hayes had died because of her. Because she followed Rawls's fake lead. She replayed every second of the ambush in her mind, and something stuck. The way Ghost moved. His stance. His height. Even through the mask, his body language was unmistakable. She'd seen it 100 times in precinct briefings, in the way Rawls carried himself like a coiled predator. It was him. She was certain now. And Hayes had paid the price for her hesitation. Rawls, meanwhile, paced his office like a caged wolf. The ambush had been sloppy. Too noisy, too rushed. And Briggs was still alive. He poured himself whiskey, hands shaking for the first time in years. Control. That was what he always had. But now, Kane's war raged hotter than ever. His lieutenants whispered about his failures. And Sarah Briggs, sharp, relentless Sarah Briggs, was closing in with the tenacity of a bloodhound. He couldn't kill her the old way. Not anymore. Too risky. So he decided on something bolder. If he couldn't silence her quietly, he would bury her in plain sight. The next day he summoned her to his office. Rough night, he said softly, the perfect mask of sympathy. Hayes was a good kid. I'm sorry you had to see that. Briggs studied him carefully. His voice was steady, his eyes even held the right amount of grief. But now she knew better. She saw the cracks, the faint twitch at the corner of his mouth, the hunger in his gaze when he thought she wasn't watching. Thank you, sir, she said evenly. I'll keep working the Kane angle. I won't stop until someone pays for Hayes. Rawls smiled faintly. That's the spirit. But in her mind, she was already planning her next move. That night, Briggs broke into the Ghost's world. She traced a van spotted near the warehouse to a shell company. The company, in turn, was linked to a charity fund Rawls had promoted for years. The circle was tightening. And then came the mistake. One of Ghost's men spotted her. She was snapping photos outside a rundown garage when headlights blinded her. A black SUV cut across the alley, tires screeching. Men jumped out, armed fast. Briggs ran, cutting through shadows, clutching her camera like a lifeline. Bullets shattered brick beside her. She barely made it into the subway tunnels, heart hammering, before they gave up the chase. Shaking, breathless, she checked the camera screen. The last shot she'd taken before the ambush was blurred, but clear enough to show a figure stepping from the SUV. Not Kane. Rawls. She had proof now. Not perfect, but proof enough to pry open doors. Still, she knew the game had shifted. The ambush wasn't just about silencing her anymore. Rawls had escalated. The next time, he wouldn't settle for intimidation. He wanted her gone. And she realized something chilling. If she was going to survive, she couldn't just investigate him. She had to outhunt him. Fractures. Detective Sarah Briggs hadn't slept in 2 days. The hospital smell still clung to her jacket, and when she closed her eyes, she saw Derek Hayes's face. His last breath. The boy who'd believed in her, trusted her, and died because she'd walked into a trap. But grief was a weapon if sharpened right. And she was done playing defense. Her first call wasn't to Sanchez, not even to her captain. She reached out to Internal Affairs. Quietly. An old contact named Melissa Jordan owed her a favor. They met in a greasy diner at the edge of town, both of them nursing bad coffee like it was penicillin. "Sarah," Melissa said, keeping her voice low, "you know what you're implying? If you're wrong, they'll bury your career so deep you'll be lucky to end up working mall security." Briggs slid the camera across the table. The grainy image of Rawls stepping out of the SUV stared back at them. "Tell me I'm wrong," Briggs said. Melissa exhaled slowly, her jaw tightening. "That's your boss. That's Deputy Chief Rawls." "Jesus Christ, Sarah." "Not just my boss," Briggs replied. "The ghost. He's been running this city at night while wearing a badge by day. Hayes died because of him. And if we don't move fast, I'll be next." Melissa rubbed her temples. "You realize how dangerous this is? He's untouchable. Half the brass loves him. The other half is terrified of him. If we come at him without a full case, then we build one," Briggs cut in. "But I can't do it alone." Melissa's silence stretched, heavy and brittle. Finally she nodded. "All right. But if we go down, Sarah, we go down hard." Meanwhile, Rawls was unraveling. On the surface, nothing had changed. He still walked into the precinct every morning in a pressed suit, the picture of authority. He still ran briefings with that calm, calculating voice that reassured his detectives. But inside, his nerves screamed. Kane's men had grown bolder. 2 of Rawls's side operations had been torched in the past week. Money streams were drying up. And worse, whispers about betrayal had started spreading among his lieutenants. They'd followed Ghost because he was invincible, untouchable. But now they smelled blood in the water. At a midnight meeting in an abandoned garage, Rawls tried to reassert control. "We tighten ranks," he barked at his men. "Kane thinks he's winning, but he's just lashing out. We hit back harder. I want his soldiers broken, his businesses crippled. And if anyone here is thinking of running to him, remember, betrayal has a price." The room was silent. Too silent. Rawls scanned their faces and realized half of them were already gone in their heads, weighing whether Kane might be the safer bet. And then came the rumor. A whisper that Briggs had survived the ambush because someone tipped her off. That she wasn't just lucky. That maybe she had proof. Rawls didn't know who started it, but he felt its weight pressing in from every side. His men glanced at him differently. Even Sanchez, his loyal bulldog partner, had begun asking too many questions. That night, Rawls tore apart his study at home, searching for any slip, any overlooked piece of evidence. His walls were lined with maps, pins, strings connecting names and places like veins. But one detail gnawed at him, the camera. Briggs had been holding it when she ran. Had she captured him? Had she seen through the mask? He poured whiskey, his reflection glaring back from the glass. He'd always prided himself on being flawless, but now the mask had cracks. Briggs, for her part, played it smart. She knew Rawls would be watching her every move, so she acted like nothing had changed. She showed up at roll call. She filed her reports. She smiled at him, even forced herself to accept his condolences for Hayes. But beneath that mask she built her net. Melissa slipped her surveillance gear, tiny recorders, hidden trackers. Briggs planted them carefully, in Rawls's office, on his car, even in the cigar box he kept in the precinct break room. Every scrap mattered. Every breadcrumb would build the trail. And the trail was forming faster than she dared hope. Financial transfers linking his charity fund to shell companies. Security footage of vans tied to Ghost's crew parking near Rawls's townhouse at odd hours. And then, her first solid gold piece of evidence, a phone call. One of Rawls's lieutenants, drunk and careless, had called his burner phone. Briggs had the recording. The man's voice was unmistakable. "We'll hit Kane tomorrow, Chief. Orders clear. Ghost takes no prisoners. Chief." That one word might as well have been a signature. Still, danger bled closer every night. Rawls had doubled his surveillance too, ordering Sanchez to tail Briggs under the pretense of keeping her safe after Hayes. She felt eyes on her constantly, the shadow of death waiting just a step behind. It forced her to move faster. Melissa pressed for caution, but Briggs shook her head. "We don't have time," she said. "He's unraveling. And men like Rawls, when they unravel, they burn everything around them. If we wait too long, more people will die." Her voice cracked, then softer. "Hayes didn't deserve that. No one else should." Melissa only nodded grimly. "And Rawls?" One night, as he sat in his darkened kitchen, he found himself staring at his service pistol. His empire was bleeding out. Kane pressed from one side. Briggs pressed from the other. For the first time, the thought occurred to him, maybe the only way to win was to burn the entire board. Kill Briggs. Kill Kane. Level the playing field with fire and blood. The idea settled in his chest like cold iron. He'd always been a tactician. Careful. Precise. But ghosts didn't survive by being careful. They survived by being ruthless. And Mark Rawls, cop, criminal, king of shadows, was ready to become nothing but a ghost. The trap. Rawls had always prided himself on control. Every crime, every deal, every kill he'd ordered had been calculated, precise. He didn't believe in luck. He believed in leverage. But now his empire was slipping, and control was a ghost he couldn't hold on to. The war escalates. Kane struck first. 3 of Rawls's men were found in a burned-out car on the east side, their mouths stuffed with dollar bills, a message written in blood across the hood: "Ghost bleeds." It was theatrical, sloppy even. But it worked. Fear spread like gasoline among Rawls's crew. Men vanished. Safe houses emptied. The loyalty that had kept his organization solid began to rot. Rawls responded the only way he knew how: violence. He ordered retaliations that lit up the city like fireworks. Drive-bys, warehouses torched, bodies left in alleys. It was chaos, pure and simple, and it gave Briggs more evidence than she could have hoped for. "Every body he drops is another nail in his coffin," Melissa whispered as they listened to the intercepted calls. "He's spiraling, Sarah. You've got him." But Briggs wasn't celebrating. She'd seen what Rawls was capable of when cornered, and the noose tightening around him only made him more dangerous. Sanchez's doubt. The crack came from within. Detective Sanchez had been Rawls's shadow for years, his right hand in raids, his shield in the precinct. But lately, something didn't fit. Why did Rawls always know exactly where Kane's people would be? Why did the raids never touch certain corners, the ones Sanchez knew were dirty? And why, when Hayes died, had Rawls been so calm? Almost too calm. Sanchez didn't want to believe it. Loyalty was in his blood. But late one night he followed Rawls on his own. No orders, no excuse. He watched his partner, the man he admired, step into a warehouse on the docks. He watched him greet men Sanchez recognized from mugshots. Criminals. Known killers. And when Rawls shook their hands, they didn't flinch. They bowed their heads like soldiers to a commander. Sanchez's stomach twisted. He couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The truth was a bullet in his chest. When Rawls came back out, Sanchez slipped away into the dark. He didn't know what he'd do with this knowledge. But he knew one thing. Everything he'd built his loyalty on was a lie. Briggs sets the stage. Melissa warned her. "You're playing chicken with a man who doesn't blink, Sarah." Briggs shook her head. "He's slipping. If I wait, he'll burn the whole city. We take him now." So she crafted the trap. An undercover sting disguised as a payoff between Rawls's men and a cartel middleman. She made sure the whispers reached Rawls, the same way she knew they always reached him. And she made sure internal affairs and federal agents were ready, watching from shadows. This wasn't just about catching him red-handed. It was about making sure he couldn't slip out on a technicality. The net had to close so tight even a ghost couldn't escape. Rawls goes hunting. But Rawls wasn't blind. He smelled the bait. He knew someone inside was feeding on his trail, leaving crumbs where there shouldn't be any. And his suspicion had only one target: Sarah Briggs. That night, he sat in his car across from her apartment, smoking in the dark. He thought about simply pulling the trigger, ending it clean. One bullet, one less problem. But then he thought of Kane. Of Sanchez, who'd been looking at him differently. Of his crew bleeding loyalty by the day. Killing Briggs wouldn't fix it. To survive, he needed to burn everything. So he decided to do both. Wipe out Kane and Briggs in one stroke. A statement to his men, a cleansing fire for the city. The night of the sting. The docks smelled of salt and rust. Cranes loomed like skeletons against the moonlight. The supposed cartel deal, was set for midnight. Rawls arrived early, his crew armed to the teeth. Briggs watched from an unmarked van half a block away, Melissa and the feds crammed beside her, headphones crackling with radio chatter. "Target's in place," whispered a voice over comms. "Ghost is here." Briggs's chest tightened. She could see him through the cracked windshield. Her boss, her nightmare, standing tall in his immaculate coat, giving orders like a general at war. "Wait for the handoff," Melissa hissed. "We need him with the money. That's the nail." But Rawls never intended to make the handoff. Instead he gave a signal. Within seconds the docks erupted, his men opening fire in every direction, bullets sparking off steel and concrete. It was a trap. Not for him. For them. The inferno. The sting turned into a war zone. Feds scrambled for cover, shouting into radios. Briggs grabbed her gun and ducked behind the van door as bullets chewed holes through the metal. Rawls moved like a phantom, calm amid the chaos, his pistol barking in sharp, measured bursts. Men fell around him, but he never flinched. To his crew he looked invincible. To Briggs he looked monstrous. She broke from cover, sprinting toward the stacks of shipping containers. She needed to get closer, needed to see him fall with her own eyes. Rawls spotted her. For a split second, their gazes locked across the smoke and fire. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Ghost behind bars. The docks burned long into the night. By the time the last gunshot echoed across the water, the city had a new scar. The fall. Briggs's ears still rang when she saw him, face pressed into the asphalt, wrists yanked behind his back. Blood streaked his cheek, his coat shredded by shrapnel. Yet even in chains, Mark Rawls's eyes were steady, cold. "Detective Rawls," the federal agent read, voice sharp as steel. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, murder, and corruption." Rawls didn't flinch. He didn't beg. He only looked past the agents, past Briggs herself, toward the flames rising from the containers. Like a king watching his empire burn. Briggs stepped closer, breathing hard. For years he had been untouchable, a shadow no one could pin down. Now she was looking at the man, just a man reduced to flesh and cuffs. "You were good," she whispered, leaning in. "But you weren't untouchable." For the first time, something flickered in his gaze. Not fear, not regret. Something darker, acceptance. The trial. The headlines split the city. Hero cop exposed as crime lord. Ghost is real, and he wore a badge. People packed the courthouse like it was a spectacle. Some refused to believe it, insisting it was a frame job. Others demanded the death penalty. The evidence, however, was ironclad. Briggs, Melissa, Sanchez, the recordings, the ledgers, all threads tied back to Rawls. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Guilty. Life without parole. As the sentence was read, Rawls didn't blink. He simply leaned back, hands folded, as though he'd already known the verdict. Briggs sat in the gallery watching. For months she'd dreamed of this moment. And yet, when it came, the victory was hollow. Because in some way he'd still won, forcing her to admit he'd fooled them all for years, climbing higher than anyone ever should have. Life behind walls. Prison didn't break Rawls. If anything, he seemed almost at ease. Inmates whispered about him. Some feared him, others wanted to serve him. Guards kept their distance, wary of the strange respect he commanded. Briggs heard the rumors. That he ran a quiet empire behind bars, trading favors for protection. That he had enemies too, both inmates and cops who wanted revenge. That he walked the yard like a man who owned it. And then the whispers stopped. The end of a ghost. It happened on a gray morning. No one could agree on the details. Some said a guard found him in his cell, beaten beyond recognition. Others whispered about poison in his food. Still others swore they heard a struggle, boots pounding down the hall before silence fell. The official report listed it as death by assault. No suspects named. No cameras working that night. Briggs read the report 3 times, her hand tightening around the paper. It was impossible to know. Had the police silenced him, erasing the shame he'd brought to the badge? Or had his enemies from the streets finally caught him, closing the ledger with blood? She would never know. Epilogue. That night, she stood on the same pier where Rawls had nearly killed her. The water was black, the city lights flickering in its ripples. Rawls had lived and died by the same code: control, leverage, shadows. He built an empire out of fear, and in the end, fear had destroyed him. But Briggs couldn't shake the thought. In some way he had written his own ending. The ghost had slipped through the cracks one final time, leaving nothing but questions. She turned, pulling her coat tighter against the wind. The city would heal, slowly, painfully. But it would never forget the cop who was also its cruelest criminal. And somewhere in the silence between footsteps, Briggs almost thought she could hear him still, laughing in the dark.